Hi everyone, I'm Mona Marlowe. Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this video, it's all about the beautiful, glamorous Candy Darling and four of her favorite fragrances that she loved and wore throughout her life. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm all about legendary perfumes and legends who wore them. And yes, Candy Darling, who was one of Andy Warhol's superstars, I consider to be a legend. And she was definitely one of the greatest pioneers for um, trans women, and she was extremely ambitious, beautiful, um, luminous, and definitely um, extremely feminine and desired to be a beautiful, glamorous superstar more than anything in her life. Um, Even though she was born a male, in her mind, since she was in kindergarten, she knew there was something different about her. Um, I did too when I was in kindergarten. Um, and she basically lived in her fantasy world where she watched movie stars and old movies. And in the late 60s, when she decided to transition, there was no trans community, LGBT community. So, and if you were trans, it was extremely secretive. You kept it a secret. So the world was a much different place. You could literally get arrested for what they considered female impersonation, wearing women's makeup, clothing, and it was brutal in the late 1960s when she decided to live her dream and become the beautiful woman that she knew was inside of her. And so she created herself and she took on the persona and the name Candy Darling, um, and got a lot of attention here in New York City from many different artists and writers. And she was extremely courageous to just be glamorous, feminine in a time when even just being a feminine woman was considered um, out of style, outdated, not politically correct. But she was a throwback of, glamorous feminine women that were superstars. And I can really 1000% relate to her desires. And I'm sort of like, I guess, a modern day Candy Darling because, you don't really see glamorous people today, not in Hollywood, not in, you know, um, the modeling world as well. And um, I think it was just inside of her. And like anyone who desires glamour, um, it starts with creating it for yourself and that certain self seduction that glamour, I think, is all about. Not so much attention, but self seduction. And that all starts with yourself. And she knew that secret about glamour and she created herself and she loved perfume. Um, and of course, she wore beautiful fragrance and had an extremely um, beautiful taste in fragrance as well. Now, these four fragrances I'm going to talk about, two of them I was told by her best friend, roommate, um, and who uh, created the movie Candy Darling, Beautiful Darling, which is here on YouTube. I highly recommend you watch that documentary. Um, he did a beautiful job really helping people understand who Candy was. And I um, met him personally and asked him what her favorite fragrances were. And he told me these two that I'm going to talk about first, and then I'm going to talk about the other two, which I found out as well she loved. The first one is a 1933 release, and it's called Secret of Venus. This fragrance um, was released by the House of Wheel, an old French perfume house. And these fragrances that they released were actually created to perfume fur coats, not to just be worn casually. But then they were loved and adored by so many and worn on the skin that they created perfume. This is an eau de parfum, and this is a straight perfume. Um, he told me that she loved this fragrance and a second legendary 1930s perfume, Joy by Jean Patou. Um, I never heard of Secret de Venus till he shared that information with me. And of course, I had to purchase it. And these are vintage. This fragrance was discontinued, I think, in the 70s or 80s, and then re-released, relaunched in, I think, in the 90s. But from what I've read, the fragrances are completely different, and it is discontinued now as well. But Secret de Venus by Wheel is probably, I'm wearing it now, the most beautiful cinnamon fragrance ever created. It has a retro feel, but it's opulent and very, very dense. And I realized her perfume choices were all extremely opulent and strong fragrances. And Secret de Venus is warm, decadent, thick. There's many real animal notes in this perfume, and it really does smell like a sexy, seductive, um, glamorous cinnamon perfume. And I can tell you, men really, really love this perfume. I think it's the cinnamon and the animal notes. Plus, of course, there's a ton of florals in this perfume, but you don't really get the florals. It creates a sort of balsamic fragrance, and it's definitely beautiful, sexy, a perfect fragrance for the fall and the winter for sure. And of course, Joy by Jean Patou. I've mentioned and I spoke about this fragrance many times. It was coined the costliest perfume when it was released in the late 1930s, and it's a very powerful, opulent, voluptuous rose, jasmine, and civet fragrance. It's extremely intoxicating and hypnotic and feminine, in my opinion. Um, most fragrances in the past um, are fragrances that I think men and women can wear in today's standards. But um, this was, of course, geared to women, and the vintage extrait is the way to go if you want to experience Joy by Jean Patou. Now, the other two fragrances, the third one is a fragrance Holly, her best friend, um, wrote in her biography or memoir that Candy, who was one of her friends, loved and wore Chanel number 5, and she would always ask Andy Warhol to buy it for her, the real perfume for Christmas. You know, Andy was generous, and he would, gift his friends gifts, and she would score this fragrance from Andy. And of course, we all know about this legendary, iconic floral aldehydic fragrance that was released in the 1920s. And Chanel number 5 is sparkly, beautiful, radiant, and I can see um, Candy Darling wearing this perfume, and I'm sure she loved it and favored it because, as we all know, it was one of Marilyn's favorite fragrances. And at the time, people didn't know the other fragrances Marilyn loved and adored. So people did know, of course, that she loved Chanel number 5. And the fourth fragrance, I don't have at the moment, is a 1940s release, and it was Magritte by the House of Carvan. And I think she loved and wore Magritte because it was her favorite movie star's um, signature scent, Kim Novak. And Magritte is a aldehydic, mossy, um, sexy, and green fragrance that was very popular in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and it is discontinued, I think, now, even though it was um, relaunched a couple times in the 80s and recently. But I will say I had it many times, the extrait, the cologne, the toilette, and it is a fabulous, very unisex perfume, in my opinion. It was released in the 40s when it was all about women being stronger and just more masculine. So the fragrances reflected that aura of fashion and the time. And I'm sure she wore it, like I said, because it was Kim Novak's signature, which I talk about in my Kim Novak video. But I am redoing this video of Candy Darling because it is her birthday today, and I dedicate this video to Candy Darling and wish her a heavenly birthday. And of course, I dedicate this video to all of her fans out there. Um, and I guess with that, I would like to close. I will see you guys in my next video to come very soon. Bye-bye.